We're going to start in Ukraine and an exclusive BBC interview with the former US military chief General David Petraeus. He's in Kyiv right now and he's met President Zelensky. Now, he says the Ukrainian upcoming counteroffensive could be, quote, very impressive. And he also says Russia's operations over the winter largely failed. Now, if you remember, US General Petraeus commanded forces in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's where he rose to prominence. He's been speaking to our diplomatic correspondent, James Landau. And just before we play a bit of that interview, he talks about the spring offensive and how impressive it could be, but also listen towards the end for his description of the Russian forces. Let's take a listen.
I believe that we'll see for the first time in this war on either side the achievement of true combined arms effects. In other words, the results of tanks protected by infantry against anti-tank guided missiles, artillery and mortars keeping the enemy's heads down, engineers reducing the obstacles, breaching these fortifications that the Russians have established, air defense keeping the Russians off the Ukrainians, electronic warfare jamming the Russians' already inadequate command and control facilities, and all orchestrated by very, very good Ukrainian command and control, and also using drones out over the Russians to attack them in depth with the precision munitions that the U.S. and U.K. and others have provided. And this, I think, is going to break the front lines. Where they do this attack, I won't speculate on that, although the Ukrainians have publicly stated that their objective, of course, is to sever that ground line of communications that enables the Russians to go along the southeast coast into Crimea. And I think this is going to be impressive. We achieved combined arms effects, say, during the fight to Baghdad when I was a two-star general, and it's terrifying for the enemy. And the difference this time over, say, what happened in Kyiv last fall, where the Ukrainians did carry out a very successful attack, is that when the lead elements culminate after 72, 96 hours, it's as far as you can physically go. There are follow-on forces that will capitalize, that will exploit and maintain the momentum and continue this. And then I think you get the battlefield, you make it dynamic. Then the Russians have to react. They have to move to try to reestablish a defensive line somewhere in the rear of where they are and where they were. And noting that on the Russian side, this is a force that has been battered, that many of these units have been in constant combat for well over a year. They're not pulling units offline and reconstituting them, in other words, replacing the losses, the people, the equipment, and retraining them. They're just adding people to the front lines. That's not the way you produce a cohesive, coherent, well-disciplined organization. And I think, therefore, that's why they're going to crack, crumble, and perhaps actually collapse. And then if you can get the Russian defenses really moving, then I think there are opportunities even more broadly.
So we're going to get a bit of analysis on that now. The BBC's World Affairs editor, John Simpson, is standing by. Hi, John. So what did you make of that confidence in the upcoming spring offensive?
Well, General Petraeus certainly knows what he's talking about. I mean, he's the man that saved the American presence, such as it was in Iraq, and got them out of there with a certain amount of success. Of course, it is perfectly possible that the Russian army will simply fold up. The army itself has not been fighting at all well. The successes, such as they've been, have been scored really by Yevgeny Prigozhin's Wagner group. Completely different, with far better discipline and so on. The command systems that the Russian army itself has are pretty feeble, and there's just that kind of tradition of always just passing up every difficult decision to the level above you and not taking any proper decisions. And indeed, Ukraine has a very good record on this kind of thing. You recall last autumn how they were succeeded. They telegraphed an attack in advance on one particular area, and lo and behold, when the time came, they fought a completely different area and won back territory that they'd lost before. All of that is true. It's just that you know, this is warfare. Things go wrong in warfare from day one. And although General Petraeus sounds extremely confident, and he's, I'm sure, been briefed thoroughly by all the top commanders, you know, things can go wrong.
Indeed, John, stay right there. I want to get your analysis to the next bit of this interview. James Landale asked about the timing of all this. We've been talking about this Ukrainian counteroffensive for quite a while. So why now? Let's take a listen.
Oh, it's very clear. The ground is not sufficiently dry. You've got to be able to go off-road without having the tanks that are, in some cases, as much as 60 tons, 70 tons if you get the M1s out there. They're not yet, I don't think, in the mix. So you have to have much firmer ground. And then second, President Zelensky has publicly stated that there's still some additional armored systems that he wants to get into this force before they actually pull the trigger. My understanding is that they know what they're going to do. When you're at that point, it's just the matter of deciding what is D-Day H hour, because that's the determination that then synchronizes everything that follows. And keep in mind that from the Ukrainian perspective, this has to become a bit of a symphony, because all of these different capabilities that I've described have to be orchestrated. They all have to do their part at the right time and quite precisely, so they're just in front of the attacking forces with its artillery and mortars. The engineers are right up with the tanks so that when they encounter an obstacle, they can very quickly breach it, defuse, and so forth. And again, without getting into further detail, that's how you need to think about this.
Let's go back to John Simpson. So a little explanation there about the timing of all this.
Yes, I think he was a little bit kind of careful in what he said. Actually, I think the real reason for the delays has been that the new equipment which the Ukrainians have been given by NATO has been quite slow in coming forward. It's been taken time to train the pilots, the tank crews, the people who are in charge of firing the longer range missiles, all these kind of things. It's taken longer than they are expecting. I saw President Zelensky 3 months ago now in February, and I was asking him naturally about what we were then calling the spring offensive. I suppose we would have to call it the summer offensive now. And I mean, he didn't give me any details. I wouldn't have expected that. But he was quite careful to say it's going to take longer than we thought. The Western powers have not been fast in supplying tanks or guns. It's taken them some time to get round to that, and the training takes a bit of time too. Nevertheless, obviously you don't want to hurry these things at all, and that's what Zelensky said to me in February. The most important thing is not to get it done by a specific date, but to make sure that everybody who's involved in the big attack knows what they're doing and knows thoroughly the equipment they're using.
Interesting. John, you reminded me there as you were talking. I spoke to a Ukrainian official in the last couple of weeks talking about the delays and reasons for the delays. And I asked specifically about jets and safety in the air and skies. And they were quite explicit, saying, we are not going to wait for the Jets coalition to come together completely. This wasn't, in their assessment, it would just take too long to wait for full cover in the air, and that they would be moving forward before that point. That seems to suggest that full control of the skies is still quite a way off.
Yes, I think so. I mean, Ukraine's been very effective, actually, in controlling its skies, in preventing the Russians from doing what they did in Chechnya, 15 years ago, what they've been doing in Syria. pretty much ever since, which is bombarding civilian centres, just smashing them from the air. Very effective and very, very destructive and cynical indeed way of fighting a war. They haven't been able to do that with Ukraine, simply because Ukraine has been better in using its ground-to-air defences. This is really, I think you put your finger on it actually, this is the one question mark that hangs over David Petraeus's otherwise very positive and optimistic view of Ukraine's chances. They are going, in a sense, too early. They're going before they've established full air superiority. And you know, probably it will be okay for Ukraine, and it will score the kind of successes that it wants to. But there is just that one solitary question mark that hangs over it all.
John, great to get your analysis. Thanks so much for that.